Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Emma shielded her eyes as the jungle canopy broke open, revealing a massive stone structure hidden beneath a thick veil of vines and moss. The heat was oppressive, but it was the weight of what she had just discovered that made her pause. This wasn't just another forgotten ruin or misplaced artifact. This was something far older, far more dangerous. Is this it? Sarah's voice broke the silence as she stepped up beside Emma. Her hands instinctively adjusted the straps of her gear behind her. Mark, their historian and expert in ancient languages, and Luke, the hired mercenary with an air of quiet menace, stood in awe of the sight. This is it, Emma replied, a sense of excitement mixed with unease welling up in her chest. The lost temple of Astor. The team had been searching for months, trekking through inhospitable terrain, deciphering cryptic maps, and following local legend. But now, standing at the entrance of the temple, the reality of what they were about to uncover finally hit them. The stone carvings on the temple's exterior worn by centuries of weather and nature, reclaiming depicted terrifying images of a demon locked in battle with ancient priests. Chains, seals, and runes bound the demon, marking the temple as a prison rather than a place of worship. Mark stepped forward, running his fingers over the glyphs. These aren't just warnings, he said softly, his voice almost trembling. They re-instruction. Emma frowned. Instructions for what? Mark looked back at her, his face pale, for keeping something in. This place isn't just a temple. It's as a vault, a prison for something old, something powerful. Emma felt a chill, despite the heat. We need to move carefully. Luke, the only one who didn't seem rattled, gave a low chuckle. Whatever's inside, it's been sealed for centuries. Doubt it'll give us much trouble. Emma shot him a sharp look, but said nothing. Luke was here for the money, nothing more. She didn't trust him, but they needed his skills. His connections had gotten them this far into the jungle, and he was one of the few people who could navigate dangerous territory without flinching. They approached the entrance cautiously, brushing aside vines and thick leaves to reveal the stone door. It towered above them with intricate carvings of men kneeling before a godlike figure. Emma could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, but beneath it was a darker energy, something that thrummed just out of reach. Looks like there's no obvious way in, Sarah muttered, pulling out a tablet and scanning the door. Her expertise in engineering had proven invaluable so far, and now she was their best chance at figuring out how to get inside. No, Mark corrected, his eyes moving across the carvings. The door's not meant to be opened easily. This isn't just about brute force. There's a puzzle here. Emma nodded. Let's take our time, we ran out rushing there. Hours passed as they worked through the markings, uncovering clues hidden in the stonework and deciphering ancient languages. Mark worked tirelessly, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Sarah used her tech to provide backup information. Emma kept a close watch on Luke, who seemed more interested in exploring the edges of the site, his eyes always scanning for something they hadn't yet noticed. Got it, Mark said. Voice broke through the tension and everyone turned towards him. His finger hovered over a series of interconnected symbols. These symbols represent elements, earth, fire, water, air, but they're rearranged in a way that suggests movement, like a cycle. It's some kind of locking mechanism if we press these in the right order. Then the door opens, Sarah asked, a spark of excitement lighting up her eye. Mark nodded. Exactly. Emma glanced at Luke, who had moved closer, watching the process with quiet interest. All right, everyone get ready. We don't know what cells behind this door. With careful precision, Mark pressed the symbols in sequence. A deep rumbling filled the air and the massive stone door began to shift, sliding slowly open with a groan that echoed through the jungle. Dust and dirt cascaded down and the scent of something ancient and long buried filled the air. Emma drew in a breath as the door finally opened, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The temperature dropped immediately, a stark contrast to the sweltering jungle outside. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the weight of time, and something else, something darker. They stepped inside, flashlights sweeping across the stone walls, revealing more glyph statues and artifacts. The temple was massive, far bigger than they had imagined from the outside, and each step seemed to bring them deeper into an ancient world untouched by modern hand. I don't too like this, Sarah muttered, her voice barely audible. It feels raw. Emma couldn't disagree. There was something oppressive about the atmosphere, as if the very walls were watching them. But they had come too far to turn back now. As they moved deeper, they encountered the first of many traps, deadly, ancient mechanisms designed to keep intruders out. Mark's quick thinking and Sarah's technical skills helped them avoid disaster multiple times, but the tension among the group began to rise. Every step forward felt like another step towards something terrible. They reached the heart of the temple, a massive chamber dominated by an altar at its center. Above the altar, a statue of the demon god, Astar, loomed, its eyes carved from blood-red stone that seemed to glow in the dim light. Chains, both physical and magical, bound the statue, locking it in place. The air in the chamber was thick with power, and Emma could feel it vibrating through her bone. "This is it," Mark whispered, stepping forward. The seal. Emma moved closer to the altar, her hand hovering over the strange lock mechanism embedded in the stone. It was beautiful in its complexity, a puzzle of interlocking pieces and ancient symbols that seemed to shift even as she looked at them. "We need to figure this out before someone else does," she said, glancing at Luke. He was watching them closely, his hand resting on his sidearm, his expression unreadable. But before they could begin working on the puzzle, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. The ground shook and pieces of the ceiling began to crumble. Emma's heart raced as she turned to see Luke standing near one of the support pillars, a wicked grin on his face. "What the hell are you doing?" Sarah shouted, her voice panicked. Luke shrugged, pulling out a device from his pocket. "You're not the only ones interested in what's inside this temple. My people have been looking for this place for years, and now, thanks to you, we were going to unlock its secret." Emma's stomach dropped as the realization hit her. Luke had been playing them all along. "You can do this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "If you release that thing, it won't just destroy us. It'll destroy everything." Luke's grin widened. "Is that the plan?" Before Emma could react, Luke activated the device, sending a pulse of energy through the temple. The chains around the statue of Astar rattled violently and cracks began to form in the stone. The ground beneath them shook harder and a low guttural sound filled the air, a sound that made Emma's blood run cold. The demon god was waking up. Emma lunged toward the altar, desperately trying to figure out the lock mechanism. If she could just reset it, maybe they could reseal the demon before it was too late. But the puzzle was too complex, the symbols shifting faster than she could comprehend. "Emma, we need to go," Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the growing roar. "I can't." Emma's voice broke as the ground gave way beneath them, sending her sprawling across the chamber floor. The energy in the air was palpable now, a dark force pressing down on them, suffocating in its intensity. Luke moved toward the altar, his eyes gleaming with madness. "It's just too late now. We're all part of something much bigger." Emma struggled to her feet, her body shaking with fear and adrenaline. She knew they couldn't all let Luke get any closer to the altar, but they were out of options. The demon was waking and the temple was falling apart. With a surge of determination, Emma grabbed the nearest piece of debris and hurled it at Luke. It struck him hard in the chest, knocking him backward. He stumbled, clutching at his ribs, but the damage had already been done. The seal was breaking, and they were running out of time. The temple was crumbling around them, stones falling from the ceiling as the tremors worsened. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see, to breathe. Emma coughed, her lungs burning as she scrambled to her feet. Luke, still clutching his ribs, staggered forward, a wild gleam in his eye. "You were insane," Emma shouted, her voice barely cutting through the din of cracking stone and the low, ominous rumble that echoed from the altar. Luke gave her a crooked grin. "Insanity, so just a word for those who can see the bigger picture." A crack split the ground between them, the floor trembling beneath Emma's boot. She glanced at Sarah and Mark, who were huddled by the far wall, trying to stay clear of the falling debris. Sarah's wide eyes met Emma's, fear etched in her expression. They had to get out now. "Emma, we need to move." Sarah's voice wavered with panic. The heavy chains around the statue of Astar were unraveling, clanking as they fell to the floor one by one. The demon god stone form was starting to pulse faintly at first, but steadily growing brighter as the seal weakened. A deep primal growl resonated from within the statue. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Luke was already edging toward the altar, again, eyes fixed on the center where the final piece of the seal lay untouched. If he reached it before they could stop him, the demon would be unleashed and they would all be dead. "No," Emma lunged, her fingers gripping Luke's arm in a desperate attempt to pull him back. He swung around, the force of his elbow catching her in the rib. Pain shot through her side, but she held on, refusing to let go. She couldn't let him win, not like that. Luke snarled, his face twisting in anger as he tried to shake her off. Don't you get it, Emma? This is power beyond anything we've ever seen. The world will bow before me. Emma Sarah's grip slipped, but not before she managed to trip Luke, sending them both crashing to the floor. Dust exploded around them as they hit the ground, gasping for breath. Luke's hand shot toward his belt, reaching for a knife. Emma saw the glint of steel, her instincts kicking it. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade as it slashed through the air. But Luke was quicker. He pinned her down, his weight crushing her against the cold stone. The knife hovered inches from her throat, and for a moment, Emma thought it was over. A sudden shout echoed across the chamber. Sarah, her eyes wild with desperation, hurled a broken piece of debris toward Luke. It struck him hard in the shoulder, throwing him off balance. Emma seized the moment, driving her knee into his stomach with all the force she could muster. Luke doubled over, coughing as the air was knocked out of him. "Get back," Emma shouted, scrambling to her feet as she shoved Luke away from the altar. Sarah and Mark rushed forward, helping Emma pull him back before he could make another attempt. The ground shook again, more violently this time. The glow around the statue of Astar intensified, the cracks along its surface widening as the seal disintegrated. Emma's stomach twisted with dread. They were out of time. "We have to reseal it," Sarah's voice broke through the chaos. "There's still a chance." "How?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. "The whole temple is falling apart." Emma's mind raced, trying to piece together the solution. The puzzle they'd worked so hard to decipher, it was still there, hidden beneath the layers of stone and ancient magic. She just had to figure out how to activate it. If she could reverse the mechanism, maybe they could reseal the demon before it fully awakened. Luke groaned from the floor, his body twisted in pain, but he wasn't finished. He would keep trying until he got what he wanted. Emma knew they couldn't waste another second. "Mark, help me with the altar," Emma shouted, rushing toward the center of the chamber where the intricate lock mechanism led. Mark was by her side in an instant, his hands trembling as he examined the symbols once more. "We need to reverse it, if we can find the right sequence." "I am trying," Mark says, voice cracked as he frantically worked the puzzle. The symbols shifted under his touch, moving faster, now as if the magic itself was slipping out of control. Emma watched, her breath caught in her throat as Mark struggled to keep up with the changes. Behind them, Sarah was doing her best to hold Luke down, but the mercenary was strong, fueled by desperation and madness. He shoved Sarah off with a brutal shove, staggering to his feet. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She could see the fire in his eyes, the single-minded determination that meant he wasn't going to stop until he had unleashed the demon. "No," Emma screamed, abandoning the lock for a split second to tackle Luke to the ground once more. They crashed into the stone floor, both grappling for dominance. Emma's fingers found the knife Luke had dropped earlier, and she grabbed it, holding the blade to his throat. "Stop this," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "If you release that thing, we're all dead. Is that what you want?" Luke's smile was sickening. "It's not about us, Emma. It's about what comes after." Before Emma could react, Luke twisted his body, knocking her off balance. He grabbed the knife from her hand, his eyes wild with fury. "You can stop this," he roared. A sharp crack split the air. Emma flinched, expecting the worst. But instead of pain, there was a soft thud. Luke's sad body slumped to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Sarah stood over him, a piece of broken stone in her hand, her face pale. He said, dead," Sarah whispered, dropping the stone, her hands trembling. Emma's mind was racing, and there was no time to think about what had just happened. The seal was nearly broken, and they had seconds, if that, to stop the demon from escaping. Mark's voice cut through the chaos. "I've got it, Emma now." Without hesitation, Emma leapt toward the altar. Her hands flew across the symbols, following Mark's instructions as he guided her through the final steps of reversing the lock. The ground beneath them rumbled, the walls of the temple shaking violently as the last of the chains fell from the demon's statue. For a moment, everything went still. The air grew impossibly thick, and the light from the cracks in the statue glowed a brilliant, blinding red. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed the final symbol. There was a deafening roar, and then silence. The light around the statue flickered and then disappeared. The cracks sealed themselves, the demon Styli's presence fading back into the stone. Emma collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the weight of what had just happened finally hit her. They had done it. They had sealed the demon god back inside. But the cost. Emma looked over at Luke's lifeless body, her chest tightening. The man who had betrayed them, who had nearly unleashed unimaginable destruction, was dead. And yet his death did bring the relief she thought it would, only emptiness. Sarah knelt beside her, her face pale and streaked with dust. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Mark, still standing by the altar, wiped the sweat from his brow and gave a shaky smile. It sighed over. The temple was quiet now, the oppressive energy that had filled the air gone. Outside, the jungle sounds were beginning to return, as if nature itself had been holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass. Emma slowly got to her feet, her legs trembling. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice hoarse, "before this place comes down on us." Together, they made their way toward the entrance, moving carefully over the broken stone and rubble. The jungle air was cool and refreshing after the stifling atmosphere inside the temple. As they stepped outside, Emma took one last look at the crumbling structure behind them. The lost temple, the prison of a demon god. They had come so close to losing everything, and yet they had won barely. Emma glanced at Sarah and Mark, her two remaining teammates, and felt a surge of gratitude. They had made it through together, but the weight of their journey, the sacrifices, the deaths hung heavily on her shoulder. As they disappeared into the jungle, leaving the temple behind, Emma made a silent vow. No one would ever find this place again. No one would ever come close to releasing the evil sealed within. The jungle swallowed them, and the lost temple was forgotten once more.